There's a school district in Maryland that has until now allowed parents to opt their K through 12 kids out of LGBTQ story time or sexual education. That includes that information. And now they're not anymore. And their reason is they've just moved all of these books that they're reading these kids. And these are young kids, like we're talking really young. They've moved, the school district has reclassified these books as not part of their sex ed curriculum or health curriculum. Now they're part of the English and language arts curriculum. And because the law does not mandate parents get to opt their kids out of English or language arts, now parents are not allowed to opt their kids out of these stories. Some parents are obviously pushing back. And this too is an interesting coalition of parents from diverse backgrounds. So there's a Muslim family, a Catholic family, a Ukrainian Orthodox family, and then I think a Protestant family as well, who've all come together and, challenged the school on this. But this is another really kind of weird example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think Beckett's representing these parents, right? Is that
Yes.
I understand that right? Yeah,
Yep.
that was an interesting kind of group, together, and I think we are going to continue to find kind of strange bedfellows on this when it comes to parental rights. That's going to continue to go forward. But, all of this, just resonates with me in language that Rod Dreher used years ago, 10, 15 years ago. I think he called it the law of merited possibilities. Like, it'll never happen. And when it does, it's your fault. It'll never happen. And when it does, you're a bigot. We have been told now since the pandemic, when all parents actually got a closer view of what their students were actually learning or not learning or whatever, not to mention being stuck in front of a screen, that they had a little bit more of a close-up view of what was happening. And they didn't like it, and which led to this mass exodus. And this exodus going into different directions. And some of these parents were motivated just by, wanting to get their kids back out of the house. Some of these parents were motivated much more by like, oh, they really are teaching our kids, kind of crazier things than we thought when it comes to class groupings and economic theory and social Marxism and all that. And then, of course, we hear the media outlets immediately and politicians immediately, come to the defense of public educators and say, they're not doing this. This is a scare tactic from the right wing. No one's grooming your children. And then you have stuff like this, where in order to get around parental rights, they reclassify a class and have just as much explicit, sort of conversation. And, then you have these, kind of rogue social media accounts that have done really, I think, some heroic work, just continually posting and reposting what actual progressive teachers have posted themselves about what their goals are. And then you just can't get to the, it's not happening anymore. It is happening. It's happening in a lot of weird places. It may not be happening in every school or every class or with every teacher, but it's happening at a level where, if there were 1/10 of the examples of somebody, reading the Bible in a classroom, we would have been notified of a national emergency long ago. So, we keep saying, oh, it'll never happen. It's not really happening. No one's doing this to your kids. And, why they're doing it? It's because you parents are actually bigots. And this is kind of a textbook example of this thing that Dreher labeled the law of merited possibility or merited impossibility. I could be wrong. Somebody's going to correct us and it'll be right.
Something like that.
But it really is something. And look, we are at the point, and we continue to say this, where parental rights have to be asserted, and they have to be asserted over against the state. And I just want to maybe just help everyone understand something. It doesn't matter if a teacher says you can't opt out of this class or this section. You're the parent. Yes, you can.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of groups ready to defend you legally. There's a whole lot of leaders. There's a whole lot of organizations that will provide support. And there's a whole lot of alternatives where if you don't want to spend all of your educational energies fighting a battle that you don't have to fight, that you can redirect your energies, your effort, your resources a different direction. And thankfully, at the same time, there's so many states like Ohio where you're at and your husband did, and and Kathy and Phoenix and others that have provided these educational alternatives to make them way more feasible than ever before. You don't have to do this. This is the great undoing of state-run education, and God bless it. Let's have it sooner. And here's how you know, by the way. Here's how you know that this is overdue. And the Washington Post ran a feature story this week on a particularly conservative homeschooling couple. They had both been raised in Bill Gothard sort of style homeschooling families, met each other, married, found themselves in some sort of situation. And then, they have chosen public education, and the glowing review for their courage and bravery to choose public schools. And I mean, and you're talking about this one segment. And by the way, I'll say, and I've been saying it for years, a significant segment of the homeschooling movement, of which I have been a part from the beginning. And there is plenty to repent of in some of the conservative circles of homeschooling. Okay. And I've said this at homeschool conventions and events and to leaders. We have had this conversation. So I know exactly the kind of story that the Washington Post is telling. And I think it's a true story. So I don't have any qualms there. But when you're like, here, let's highlight this one example right here. And then the floods going the other direction,
Well, the fact that that's even a story is sort of telling you about the flood. Right?
I mean, it is. It's like, doing a traffic report, on the lanes, going into Denver at 7 p.m. I mean, that's not where the story is. The story's the other direction, folks. You need to tell me about the southbound lanes of 25, not the northbound lanes at that time of the day. Tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., please tell me, about the northbound traffic, not the south. I mean, it's just a bizarre, reading of the room, really.